Thank you for your commitment to professional development in grant administration. This e-learning resource will take you through training on grant monitoring. This training was developed by the Office of Grants Management. Our mission is to standardize, streamline, and improve state grant making practices, as well as to increase public information about state grant opportunities. This curriculum was developed with our office in conjunction with the Nonprofits Assistance Fund, in addition to consultation with the subcommittee of state agency representatives from the Departments of Natural Resources, Education, Public Safety, Health, and Employment and Economic Development. Nonprofits Assistance Fund mission is to build financially healthy nonprofits that foster community vitality. Their financial experts help nonprofits strengthen their capacity to address unexpected events, finance new opportunities, and realize strategic goals. They fulfill their mission by helping nonprofits thrive. We have several pieces of common purpose as we approach grant administration. We have a commitment to transparency, mutual respect, and customer service. We strive for pride and professionalism in our field, and we're dedicated to public service and stewardship of state resources. We value building and maintaining positive relationships with grantees. We accept the responsibility to clearly communicate and ask questions from a starting point of seeking to understand. We demonstrate patience and persistence as we move toward an outcome where the reward of having ongoing dialogue results in the most amount of information being shared based upon trust and mutual respect. We also have 4 guiding principles in our work. First, the value of our work. It has purpose and it clearly contributes to meaningful outcomes. We also employ risk assessment, and this helps us address the continuum of grantees and grant practice so we can effectively identify high, medium, and low risk. Capacity is also another key guiding principle. We work to efficiently and competently complete the work to meet minimum requirements with our available staff resources. Finally, we also look at minimum requirements and know that the minimum requirements in state grants policy must be met through our practices and procedures. Our training outcomes through this stack is to build confidence and comfort with the grant monitoring process, build monitoring skill capacity with state grant staff, provide a baseline understanding of an effective grant monitoring process, and set the stage for next steps for staff to begin developing a monitoring plan, templates, and tools with your team. We have had revisions to the grant monitoring policy, so this slide will start to explain what those revisions are with respect to minimum requirements. The grant monitoring policy requires that monitoring is done before final payment is made on all grants of over $50,000 and to conduct at least annual monitoring on grants of over $250,000. In addition, revisions in the definition for financial reconciliation are effective as of July 1st. For financial reconciliations, state agencies must conduct this practice before final payment is made on grants of over $50,000. An additional change in the requirement for financial reconciliation allows for agencies to identify and document what source documentation will be used and which grant project expenditures are subject to financial reconciliation. This slide takes you through all of the revisions and changes that are effective as of July 1st. First, monitoring and financial reconciliation must be completed before final payment is made. Second, agencies with multiple grants of similar grant periods with the same grantee may choose to identify through a documented risk assessment which grants represent a sample that will receive monitoring and financial reconciliation before final payment is made. Additionally, agencies can choose to identify those standards for source documentation for financial reconciliation and establish which grant project expenditures are subject to financial reconciliation. Now we'll go through the definitions in policy that include changes effective as of July 1st. The grant period refers to the start and end date of the grant contract. The grant monitoring visit involves both state granting agency staff and/or contractors and the grantee, and it occurs before final pay is made. It may be conducted on site or by phone. The purpose of the visit is to review and ensure grant progress, address any problems before the end of the grant period, and to build rapport between the state agency and the grantee. Additionally, the definition of the Monitoring and Financial Reconciliation Plan has been enhanced as of July 1st. We'll go through it on this slide. Agencies complete a risk assessment of their grantees that contributes to a plan to monitor and conduct financial reconciliation of grants over $50,000 before final payment is made. This plan includes a timeline for completing the work during the grant cycle, including final payment. It also includes a methodology and sampling method that agencies can use for conducting monitoring and financial reconciliation for grantees that agencies have multiple grant contract agreements in place with. Additional components in the monitoring and financial reconciliation plan include identifying grant risk factors such as staff turnover, prior performance, pre-award financial review results, delayed reporting, and other components that the agency can identify. Agencies can choose to document this current plan and retain it on file as part of their written grants policies and procedures. The plan can be updated as needed. Now we'll address the scope of this policy. It applies to all executive branch agencies, boards, committees, councils, authorities, and task forces that make grants. It also applies to competitive, legislatively made, formula, and single and sole source grants. It supersedes other state agency policies that concern grant monitoring, except when that existing state agency policy is stricter. Grants in which monitoring expectations are statutorily defined are not covered by this policy. Why is grant monitoring valuable? We review and ensure progress against grant goals. We can address any problems or issues during the grant period, and we can learn from and build rapport with grantees. Now we'll address some basic vocabulary. Monitoring represents an overall system of reviewing, tracking, and reporting on federal and state grant funds. The purpose of monitoring is to provide accountability and oversight, measure grantee performance, discover grantee best practice and innovative work, ensure proper spending, follow up with grantees that may need assistance, and identify opportunities for improvement. Monitoring can be accomplished through technical assistance, desk review, on-site review, and ongoing communication. State agencies may conduct monitoring in person or by phone. Site visits are recommended whenever possible. There's a recommendation that each grant program use a standardized form and procedures for consistency. Documentation from the monitoring visits and calls must be kept in the grant file. Here are some examples of day-to-day monitoring activities. Anytime a financial report is reviewed and approved, anytime a progress report is reviewed and approved, telephone contacts and email contacts. Those all contribute to your understanding of grant progress. An effective grant monitoring visit or call may cover these topics: statutory compliance, challenges faced by the grantee, modifications made to the grant program, program outcomes, grantee policies and procedures, grantee governance and organizational structure, financial reconciliation, and training and technical assistance needs. Now we're going to take you through the grant monitoring steps. The first step you need to take is to develop your plan. So what's included in the plan? An effective plan describes the type of monitoring that will be conducted: desks, calls, or site visits. In addition, it will include the categories of grantees. For example, new grantees, multiple grants of similar grant periods with the same grantee, grantees with multi-year funding, continuation grantees, and high priority grantees. Other pieces that are important for the plan are grant amounts. Again, the minimum requirement in policy addresses that grants of over $50,000 receive a monitoring visit and financial reconciliation at least once before final pay, and grants of over $250,000 receive annual monitoring visits and financial reconciliation at least once before final pay. It will also be important in the plan to include grant periods. In addition, this is where the risk assessment will be very helpful for your plan, because according to policy and effective with the revision as of July 1st, agencies can choose to identify and document which grant risk factors contribute to monitoring and financial reconciliation frequency. As referenced, a granting agency with multiple grants of similar grant periods with the same grantee can choose to identify a sampling method of which grants will receive monitoring and financial reconciliation before final payment is made. Other pieces important for the plan are the duration and cycle of the grant work and any special circumstances. This slide shows a way to think about prioritizing monitoring. As you can see, there will be grants that have lower risk, and there will be grants that have medium to high risk. So this is something that agencies will be able to take into account as they complete their risk assessment. This slide gives an example of a monitoring plan. It's meant to show all of the different components that go into monitoring, in addition to the grant type, how long the grant is, and how much the grant award is. This slide gives a great example of how one federal agency posts their monitoring notice for all of their grantees. So this shows that at any time there's full transparency on when grant monitoring will take place. It's one approach. So in addition to developing your plan, we're going to talk through those procedures. You'll develop procedures and templates for your visits, and you're going to identify which grants require a monitoring visit, which require a reconciliation, where those visits and financial reconciliations will take place, and which agency employees will participate. Next, we'll go to step 2, which is notifying the grantee. We have these procedures in policy, and so state agencies need to schedule those monitoring visits and provide grantees adequate notice and preparation time. We want to set grantees up for success so that grantees know how to prepare for that monitoring visit and financial reconciliation, what the format will be, and which grantee staff members will be involved in the visit. It's also important that all financial and progress reports that have been submitted will be reviewed before that monitoring visit takes place. So some considerations to take into account when you're contacting grantees is around relationship. What kind of relationship do I currently have, and what kind of relationship do I hope to have? In addition, we want to look at communication. Have we encouraged proactive, frequent, consistent, and transparent communication up to this point? And we want to make it clear that grantees can contact us if they have any questions about the monitoring call or visit. Some considerations for state grant staff is we just want to ensure that we're clear on the grantee's work and workflow. This helps us understand and effectively plan for and schedule that monitoring. We want to respect the natural cycle of the work and the grant funds and what that supports. The other piece that we want to take into account is which state staff will be participating in the monitoring. We need to know that for effective coordination. We also want to make sure that when we provide notice and schedule the monitoring with the grantee, that it includes the grant monitoring tool that will be used. We want to give enough time that allows both of us to talk through logistics, prepare, give the grantee options of times and dates to choose from, and just allow them plenty of time to respond to the request. Now we're moving into scheduling the monitoring. Once that date and time are agreed on, we send them confirmation. We, of course, want to ensure that we're identifying who's invited, the type of visit, if it's an on-site visit or a conference call. If it's an on-site visit, what location we'll be going to, making sure that the grantee has the conference call information, making sure that we provide that monitoring tool that we'll be using, and also pointing to those key topics of discussion and monitoring. For example, grant outcomes, data, reporting, and any specific or programmatic fiscal or data requests. Here are some questions that can help you with scheduling. As you make those logistics, you want to think about who are those important contacts that I need to speak with or meet with, where I can really understand grantee performance. And if I'm doing an on-site visit, what components of the environment do I need to see and get a sense of their grant performance? And finally, I want to make sure I've clearly communicated those expectations, activities, and the purpose of the monitoring to the grantee. Now we're moving into step 4, which is prepare. This is going to have the longest amount of information in this training because what we know is the time that we put in for preparation is always time well spent. The monitoring tool should contain key questions that are consistent with grant purpose. The tool should demonstrate continuity with the grantee's application materials, the grant contract agreement, the work plan, and the budget. In addition, you want to take time to review and analyze those grant materials in order to extract key themes, outcomes, outputs, data points, regulations, and any required reporting information. An effective monitoring tool will be able to collect information in those key areas. You always want to stay familiar with the grantee's field and the nature of their work and revisit that tool annually to edit and reflect any lessons learned from monitoring that you've done in the previous year. So here are some things to think about as you're developing or refining your monitoring tool. Does it collect information on program purpose, target population, leadership and governance, staffing, budget and financial management, partners and collaborators, evaluation procedures, outputs and outcomes, compliance with applicable statutes and laws, and any grantee feedback, and if there are ways that the state can assist the grantee. As we look at who benefits from the grant, here are some key questions to be thinking about with the grantee's target population. Who does the grant serve? What are those specific demographic and geographic distribution of the grant services? Have changes taken place in the target population? How are people referred to the grant-funded program? And how are participants involved in shaping the program and the grant outcomes? We'll also look at governance. Here are some key questions around grantee leadership and governance. These are applicable for nonprofits. Does the organization have an effective board? How often does the board meet? How is the board kept informed of the organization's progress and challenges? How does the leadership of the organization support the program? Here are some key questions for grantee leadership and governance for municipalities and local units of government. What's the organizational structure? And who are the members involved in governance and what authority do they hold? Here are some questions about grant-funded staff. What staff positions are supported by the grant? When applicable, what staff qualifications are required for quality service delivery? Are the staffing levels appropriate to meet the grant purpose? How long have staff been there? Does the staff reflect the population that the program serves? Are staff evaluated in their performance? And how are volunteers involved in program delivery? Next comes some key questions around the grant budget. Is the budget accurately reflecting grant project timelines and deliverables? Are pre-approved budget adjustments consistent with pre-approved work plan adjustments? If there is a match requirement for the grant, has the organization fulfilled the requirements? Here's some questions on grant fund management. How are grant expenses tracked? If projects are funded by more than one source, how does the grantee track which source should be charged? How are financial transactions processed? Who's involved? What are the procurement procedures? Does the grantee use cash or accrual-based accounting? Now we'll move into partners. Here are some questions that can be asked of grantees around their partners and collaborators. Who helps them do their work? What other funders are invested in the program? And who are the champions of this program in the community? Next, we'll move into questions on evaluation. What does success look like for the grantee and for the grant? And how is it measured? How is the program evaluated? Who gathers the data and how is it analyzed? And finally, what's done with those evaluation results? Now we're moving into the deliverables. When we look at monitoring outputs and outcomes, we first want to verify that both outputs and outcomes in the approved grant work plan or grant application are taking place within the proposed timelines. Are there significant changes in what the grantee has proposed to do and what is actually being done? What factors are impacting performance? This information should be easily referenced in the approved grant work plan. Here are some key questions around grant outputs. How many people are served? In what areas? What populations? How many activities are conducted? Here are some key questions for grant outcomes. What changes in attitude or behavior does the program produce? How have people's lives or conditions changed because of the program? Now we'll move into compliance. Here are some tips to pull compliance information and utilize it in your grant monitoring tool and process. You want to use the grant contract agreement to select those important requirements to verify. For example, is there reporting data that you need to reflect back to the grantee or ask further questions about? In some instances, is there a requirement to verify participant eligibility? You also want to refer to the funding sources of the grant to select those important requirements. For example, are there content-specific regulations? As a reference to the federal grants guidance, there are some useful ways to look at monitoring and internal controls and performance metrics. So our state requirements do have a consistency with the federal grants guidance. We also want to look at how do we build in learning for both ourselves and grantees with our monitoring. For example, can the grantee share best practice? What information can the grantee provide that will help the state better understand that grantee's unique contributions to our shared constituents? Finally, how can the state assist? What kind of training or technical assistance would be useful for the grantee? And does the grantee have any feedback or suggestions for the state? We always want to incorporate customer process and feedback. Now we'll look at step 5, which is actually implementing monitoring. So we want to be thoughtful when we're conducting monitoring. We of course want to arrive or begin on time. We want to be prepared, respectful, and always come from a point of seeking first to understand. We can probe or dig deeper with responses when we need more information. And finally, we want to work towards balancing what we're seeing and hearing with our inner intuition. Here are some reflective questions to ask yourself as you're conducting monitoring. If you're on site, what kinds of observations do you have about the environment? When you're conducting a call, is there back and forth dialogue between myself and the grantee representatives, and is it even and balanced? When we're on site, how do the staff interact with each other and program participants or customers? Am I asking questions that demonstrate I'm seeking to understand? Am I aware of the power dynamics in the room or on the call? This is something to be mindful of. Finally, We want to make sure that this process of monitoring is helping our agency with a deeper understanding and helping with building a positive relationship with the grantee. Next, we'll move into documenting. So the monitoring report should be in a template or format that is clear, easy to read, and ties back to the grant monitoring tool that's used. Agencies determine exactly what and how much information is included in that monitoring report. The report should include the monitoring results, any grantee strengths and challenges. It should identify questions and areas of follow-up if it's applicable, and it should also point to if the process is completed or if any additional steps are coming as a result of the process. If follow-up is required, just identify and provide what that is, the timeline, and the appropriate agency point of contact for any follow-up that comes from monitoring. In addition, the monitoring report can point to recommended training or technical assistance if applicable for the grantee. And finally, we always want to thank and acknowledge the grantee's time and cooperation with the process. Here are some key questions to ask yourself as you're writing the report. What are the grantee's strengths and challenges? Are there specific processes, results, or systems that I learned about during the monitoring visit or call that demonstrate best practice? Other questions are around findings. Are there findings that require follow-up? How, when it's applicable, is the grantee's response to the monitoring findings addressed? This is where you want to ensure there's a clear process for managing that follow-up that's identified to findings that have been learned during monitoring. If no follow-up is required, you just want to clearly indicate that. Here are some further tips as we look at facts and perceptions and balancing that as we capture the results of monitoring. We want to look at, have I had an intangible reaction in addition to the facts? And if I have, more than likely all of us will, who in my agency can I discuss this with? It's important to build in time to debrief with your colleagues about the activity. As we move into actually writing the report, we really want to look at what are those key, pertinent, and factual pieces of information that are included in the report. And does this report clearly assess the grantee's current situation? We want to be looking at that balancing of the subjective information we have and the objective information we have. Now we're moving into step 7, which is follow-up. This is where you want to make sure you build in time, because as you work within your state agency and with the grantee to resolve questions or concerns that may have been identified during grant monitoring, there's a lot of opportunity for ongoing learning and two-way communication. This is where we want to ensure that we're seeking first to understand and we're staying open to the teachable moments with everyone involved. We look at communication as a key piece in this. There will likely be questions or follow-up that come from conducting grant monitoring. There may be issues to resolve or concerns about how a program is operating. This is where you want to think about in what circumstances does the monitoring you've conducted require you to consult with other people in your agency or across divisions, involve your supervisor in the situation, or consider amending or terminating an agreement with a grantee. As we look at consult, we want to think about who can I talk with in my agency that may have encountered a similar situation with another grantee, someone who may have experience with that grantee and can provide you with additional perspective. Someone may have greater understanding of the issue, be it programmatic or fiscal, and you want to ensure that you've got some trust and confidence and with a colleague that's willing to be a sounding board to your ideas. Monitoring is an opportunity where you are distilling all that information that you've learned, and it's always good to have a colleague or even your whole team to bounce off what you've learned with your team. As we look at the coordination that's happening in this step, We want to just make sure that we're troubleshooting how we approach follow-up with our colleagues, especially across divisions, particularly when we have multiple grants with the same grantees across a division and that or an agency and involves several agency colleagues. This is where coordinating the message is important. Finally, we want to work directly with the grantee to resolve the questions or the topics that the monitoring has raised. And we want to approach those conversations and communication with the grantee with respect, candor, and honesty. There are times where we need to seek support and involve our supervisor in situations when we're unable to resolve the topic or question or concern that we've learned about from the monitoring activity. We may have seen potential red flags that indicate more follow-up may be required and generate additional questions, or the issue with the grantee is potentially illegal. As we move into step 8, this is where we're looking at reflecting and adjusting. After our grant monitoring process is completed, we really want to ask ourselves, what did I learn? How do I share that information with my colleagues and with grantees? Am I tracking and analyzing grantee monitoring findings and grantee best practice? Are there trends I see? We really want to use that data effectively that we've collected during this process. We want to incorporate and improve our process, so we look at lessons that we've learned and look at how they can revise and improve any future grant requests for proposal and application processes. In addition, the lessons we've learned can help us refine and enhance our future monitoring cycles. Finally, we want to look at, have we collected feedback from grantees? And is there a way to incorporate that feedback in either the monitoring process and or our grant request for proposal process? Now we're moving into next steps. Using your grant portfolio data and sample templates and tools and resources on OGM's website, you can begin to flesh out your plan. As you gather your grant data, you want to be able to flesh out that plan based on grantee type, identifying multiple grants of similar grant periods with the same grantee, grant award period, grant award amount, payment conditions, any existing reporting and monitoring activities, and the cycle of grant-funded work. For example, what's that cycle of startup, peak workflow? As you continue to develop your monitoring toolkit, you're going to look to your grant contract agreements, work plans and budgets, and begin to develop a grant monitoring tool, your communication templates, and your reporting templates. Feel free to streamline and use the monitoring tool as the report template. Please feel free to visit OGM's website for resources on monitoring that includes monitoring plans, monitoring visits, worksheets, reporting templates. Finally, I want to thank you for doing this important work. Our office is always interested in learning more about how agencies approach this, and we like to share best practice. Please feel free to reach out to our office if you're interested in highlighting your work. Thank you.